Welcome back to The Baby in the Crib. This is clip number 9. And what I want to do right now is talk a little bit about some of the information that we had found. I want to start with Frank Hague. Now, this is tape 9. I don't know if any of you that are listening have gone and read some stuff on Frank Hague. To anyone to think that a mayor of a city would have a child kidnapped, it sounds a little far-fetched. And right from the very beginning, when we started the research, it seemed that way to me too. I mean, somebody like that just don't go and kidnap someone, After all the material that I read on Frank Hague, it's quite obvious that he wouldn't let anybody stand in his way. So, and especially when it came to the politics, he was heavily involved in the politics, a lot more than most politicians are. Like a mayor of a city, I mean, I've worked for a city, and they stay within their own city lines. He, on the other hand, was into everything: state, the cities, the state, having people elected to be judges, and all types of high positions. Two of his own friends were governors. He had them made governor. He was able to get these people elected, the ones that he backed. I mean, not all of them won the whatever race they were going for, but he did pretty well. Of course, from the early 20s, I mean, they were after him for voter fraud. They knew, and that was probably the reason why these people won elections, is because of the voter fraud. But when he set his mind to get somebody in, more than likely, they were able to take that position. Now, there's so many people when it comes to Hague. When you talk about Hague, there's just so many people in this whole Lindbergh incident that has ties to Frank Hague, that it's hard to not, acknowledge that, to ignore the fact that so many were involved with him. It just seems funny. Now, as far as the trial went with Richard Hauptmann, my personal feeling on that, and I think I've stressed this before, I really don't believe that Hauptmann went down to the Lindbergh's house and snatched that kid. I think he was just involved with the wrong person, and I really do believe that money was left at his house, probably purposely to frame him. If somebody left a bunch of money at my house and I found out that he died over in Germany, and I think anybody could say this, they probably would spend the money. I mean, Hauptmann was not a rich man. Here he has a friend that screwed him over a few times. Now the guy leaves all this cash in his garage, or wherever the heck it was. It was in a box somewhere. He finds out the guy is dead. He has no wife. The man wasn't married. He had no kids. He went back to his home country and he died. So the money is there. I guess he figured he'd spend it. And I guess if it was left there on purpose, he did exactly what they wanted him to do. In the meantime, they got the wood from his garage and made that ladder, and there you go. He's nailed. But, as far as taking the baby, I don't think he had anything to do with it. Whoever went and took that baby, they knew exactly what they were doing. I don't think Hauptmann was that type of a man. just by listening to some of the clips. He didn't come across to me as being that way. I mean, you can be wrong just looking at somebody or listening to them, but usually, and it never fails me, when I listen to somebody talk, if they're a little off in what they're saying, I usually know that. I usually pick it up just by their facial expressions. But anyway, I didn't get that feeling with Wantman. Now, the prosecutor that prosecuted him, like I said before, he was a friend of Hague. The man had no experience in trying murder trials. To me, he came across as just a lawyer, a flashy lawyer. Frank Hague had him appointed Attorney General. And, by doing that, then he was able to try this case without experience, which makes no sense. You still don't have experience. But, Frank called his friend, A. Harry Moore. There's another one. He got him in office. He was a good friend to Hague from Jersey City. Hague got him into office for governor. So Hague probably called him and said, hey, do me a favor, get this guy in. We need him for the trial. Which is okay, But when you think back to it, why would Frank Hague even get himself involved in that? I mean, he put himself involved in that case right off the bat, which seems a little suspicious. Why jump into something that, I've never seen it listed that he was actually asked for assistance in, helping out with the case. I know that they needed the extra police officers when they were doing a search of the baby, but I mean, his investigator, Harry Walsh, stuck with the case right to the very end. In fact, Harry Walsh, in later years, he was promoted. So you see kind of like a trend here. It seems to be, too, that the people that were involved with Hague later on were rewarded with promotions. I mean, maybe they deserve promotions for the jobs that they were doing, but we know all too well, after reading so much about him, about Hague, that this was the way that he, if you did something good for him, that's how he rewarded you. So when you see a handful of people that were involved in this case that are connected with Hague, that were rewarded for whatever reason it could be, you can't ignore that. It draws some suspicion as to why these people were promoted. Now, even Hoffman, Governor Hoffman, he was very friendly with the prosecutor down in South Jersey. They worked for the same newspaper, and this was going back years before, the politics kicked in. They knew each other from there. And it's apparent that Hague was familiar with Hoffman. Now, he was governor of New Jersey, so Hague had his nose in that somehow. Whether he got him in office or he was kissing his ass because he was the governor. So, either way, Hague knew him. He turns up dead. Of course, they listed it as a suicide, that, he stole money from the unemployment. He was the unemployment commissioner. I don't know exactly what his title was, but that he was supposed to have embezzled money through that company. And, he felt so sorry that he did it, that he blew his brains out, but left a note and explained that he did steal money, which makes no sense to me. But if, for the ones that have followed the Lindbergh case, that Hoffman was involved with Richard Hauptmann. They were trying to do something, before he was executed. They postponed it for a little while, but he couldn't do what he wanted to do for him. In the meantime, he was working with Ellis Parker, the one from down in Burlington, the investigator. And between the two of them, they had compiled a lot of information on the case. Now, Ellis Parker was known to solve the most difficult murder cases. He was very good at what he did. And he teamed up with Hoffman and wanted to, help out. And it seems like, his records are gone mysteriously. They don't exist anymore. God knows what happened to them. But anyway, it seems to be that he was kind of set up in a way. There's a few people involved where somebody called him and said he was involved and meet me in New York. And then he brought him back into Jersey to question him. And bang, they hit him with a kidnapping charge. How convenient. They had just passed that because of the Lindbergh kidnapping. But driving someone from New York into New Jersey to question them because they call you and tell you they had something to do with the kidnapping. So that's how him and his son were arrested, and Ellis Parker went to jail for that. While he was in jail, he died. So there's another one gone. Two of them gone. Another association is Edward Edwards. He's from Jersey City. He was the governor of New Jersey. Very close friend with Hague. Very close. He was the president of one of the banks in Jersey City. And it's noted that through him, Hague was able to acquire a lot of stocks through the bank. Just like John Milton, he probably had him buy them, and then Hague would reimburse him. There was stock thought to be under, alias names. The name McNulty was one of them that was mentioned. They were a prominent family in Jersey City. Maybe Hague wanted to be like him, so he used his name. But anyway, so Edwards was a little... well, he was friends with them, so he knew what he was about. It turns out that Edwards later on made a comment about how Hague acquired his wealth. At that point, they no longer talked. Something happened there. Hague went from backing him with the politics to no communication at all. He turns up dead in his home. Committed suicide. He shot himself in the head. It was reported that he was distraught over the death of his wife a year before, and that he had found out that he had skin cancer. I can't imagine, and I'm not saying that he didn't love his wife. I've known a few politicians through the years. They spend many, many hours away from home. And it doesn't matter how much you love someone, if you're away from them that much, if they unfortunately pass away at a young age, I don't think, I could be wrong, but it just seems funny that here's a man that was governor of New Jersey. He was into the politics, very strong for a lot of years. I can't imagine someone that has spent so much time away from home be so devastated by the death of a family member that he didn't even spend much time with. I could be wrong. We all feel bad when we lose a family member, but I can't imagine him being so distraught over it. But they found him dead too. So that there is 3 people. Now you have the case of the Morrows in the Morrow household. You have Morrow himself that passed away in 1931 from a cerebral hemorrhage. They said that he was fine. He was a healthy man. A few days prior to his death, they noticed that he was very sluggish and, sleeping late in the morning. And, I mean, it could have been a legit stroke that he had. But it seems funny that you have in your household, after the kidnapping, and I'm talking about Violet Sharp, the housekeeper. She was the one that drank down the potassium cyanide or whatever it was, the silver polish. She drank it down with water. It's a pretty brutal suicide to do that to yourself. Back in the 30s, it was a little popular to poison people. I mean, you heard a lot of it. They would just put it in your food and do you in. I don't recall reading too much about people committing suicide drinking poison. But, I mean, it could be legit, but it's just a coincidence that he dies from a cerebral hemorrhage. Then she kills herself with silver polish. Now, they say that she had it in her closet. It was, I guess she had just opened it or whatever, but she brought it from the other place that she worked at. Now, first of all, how did they know that? If I was to move in as a housekeeper, I don't think I'm going to tell you that I have a jar of silver polish in my closet that I brought from a previous employer. So how they definitely knew that's where it came from is a little bit funny. But anyway, she opens it, she mixes it with water in a glass, and she drinks it down. And then she goes running downstairs and she collapses and she dies. I don't know. There were other people in the house that day. One of them being Marguerite Young. I believe Charles Ellerson was there. I mean, they were working. It was a weekday. They were working. So it could have been anyone that did that to her. But the point I'm trying to make is that even if she did it herself, she acted suspicious right from the beginning. So either she knew something about the incident or she was involved in the incident. But anyway, if you were to give, now I've gone online and I've researched it, I mean, not extensively, but enough to show to convince me that that same powder, if put into food in small quantities, would cause a cerebral hemorrhage. It could cause a heart attack and a stroke. So who's to say? I mean, they took it that he had a cerebral hemorrhage, which, yes, I'm sure when they did the autopsy, they can show that. Back then, poisoning was not detectable by an autopsy. So if he was poisoned, they wouldn't know it. And the poison could cause the same thing that he died from. So, if I'm wrong, it's still another death. Now you have her and you had him. That's 2 more deaths. Watley, the man that worked, him and his wife were servants for the Lindberghs. A short time after the kidnapping occurred, he had some type of surgery done. It wasn't, well, back then they didn't do major surgery like they do today, although the minor stuff they did was considered major because of the time. He had something that's considered simple. I don't remember if it was his appendix or the gallbladder. It was something, on those lines. It wasn't a heart operation or nothing. he died. He died in the hospital. So here's another person dead, which seems really odd. I mean, these deaths can't be traced back to Hague, but it happens within, and, you know, anyone doing research on the Lindbergh case, I'm sure, has taken notice of all the deaths involved. Just seems odd. It's odd that in one situation you have quite a few fatalities. But the two of them are connected to Hague, the Edwards and Hoffman. They weren't immediately after the kidnapping. It was in time. And Ellis Parker, I mean, he was basically thrown in jail, and the key was, you know, put in jail and the key is thrown away. So was that done purposely? Who, you know, who influenced the guy that called him and said that he was involved in it to come meet me, you know? Was it sounded more like it was a setup. So you have quite a few, you know, incidents within the case that make you think, you know, were these people ones that could possibly identify people involved? Did they know something? That's my feeling, that they knew too much. The ones that wind up dying knew too much. And I believe, especially with Edwards, I think Edwards had information that could do serious harm to Hague. And that's why, you know, he winds up dying when he did, unfortunately. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about, and most of this clip is going to be about Frank Hague. There's a lot of information to, not information, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about that I've already said in the other tapes. Now, you would think to yourself, I thought to myself, why would he do that? You know, if it was him that did this, why would he do it? Okay. Well, in 1921, as early as 1921, they were trying to bring charges against him for voter fraud. So now here's a guy that's mayor from 1917. By 1921, they're ready to throw him in jail. But it seemed like no matter what he was charged with, the charges were always, they were always able to get them either dropped or dismissed. Nothing stuck. Nothing stuck. And the funny thing is, you know, because he was so connected in the politics, he had people all over. Now, I did mention before about Teddy Fleming, Thomas Fleming, his father, Teddy, he wrote the book about. In his book, he mentions that his uncle, his father's sister's husband, was head of the, you know, he did like with the jury and stuff. So, in fact, he mentions it in the book that that's how Hague avoided a lot of stuff, because he would know before time if charges were going to be brought against him. He would kind of get the heads up from this guy, letting him know, you know, hey, this is what's going on. I mean, he could have went to jail himself for doing that. I mean, especially today, if you got caught doing that, you go to jail. Probably then he wouldn't, because he was hooked up with Hague. But he would always give him the heads up. So Hague always knew well before time what was about to happen. And it gave him, I'm sure, him and his lawyer, John Milton, time to prepare, you know, for whatever charges were brought against him. In fact, when his nephew died and he came, he was in Italy at that time on vacation. and his nephew died. He passed away. That was the nephew that took over the seat as mayor when Hague retired. He had passed away. He was in in Europe, and when he came here, they arrested him right in front of the funeral parlor for charges, and that was why he was always away. As early as, like 1920s, 21, I think it was listed that they were convinced that he was going to take off and go to Europe. He was always in England, and more than likely had property there. And because of the charges that he faced, they were convinced that he would just flee, and that's where he would go. So through the years, I mean, that's the way he lived. There was a lot of shady stuff, and probably a lot of stuff that people would never know about. But he was lucky. He never went to jail. I guess the people that he had backing him were powerful enough to keep him out of jail. But the thing is, at that point, when the walls started to crash in, or he thought they were crashing in at that time, in the 20s. Now that falls right into a timeline. You can see the timeline there is with the politics. Things were starting to go wrong. He needed people to be in office for him to survive as ruler of Jersey City and the state. He would have to start putting in people to back him, his own people. And that, it's funny because in that time, well, then in the area of 1929, that was when the stock market crashed. And you could read a lot of literature on it that actually Hague made out by that happening, But from that point on, now 1929, came the threat against Constance Morrow. Now you think to yourself, well, why, and I've said this a few times already now, why would you do something like this, From what I read about Frank Hague, this is the stuff he would be definitely capable of. I think there's a lot more that we know between him and Dwight Morrow. Obviously, there was no love between the two of them. I believe he was set on keeping that man out of politics. If he would have ran for president, chances are he would have had Lindbergh run possibly as either vice president or maybe an aide to him. I'm sure Lindbergh would have been involved in that political area if Morrow did run for president. I think Frank Hague would do anything to stop that. That's something he didn't want, because I believe that Dwight Morrow was pretty smart to the fact of Frank Hague, and I think he realized that he could just put an end to him, and that probably would have happened. There was a lot of people that wanted to put an end to him. They just couldn't get into the position to do it. Because, 29, your child is threatened with a kidnapping. 31, unfortunately, he passed away. Actually, 1930, it shows that his nephew is, I'm going to say, following the Lindberghs, because it seems plain as day that's exactly what he was doing there in St. Louis. 1931, Dwight Morrow passes away. All the people that are involved, that are related, they're all related. This one here is related to the Bennett in New York. It just seems, is that a coincidence? Now, the thing is, he could have very easily taken that baby and put him in Jersey City, even if it wasn't his own idea. To hide a child in Jersey City, no one would dare question him or try to get in there to search for a child. They wouldn't be allowed. They would either have had their legs broken or worse. There was no way that someone would find a child there. Is that the reason why the child was there? Because they knew that they can bring him into that city and no questions would ever be asked. I mean, just regular citizens coming through the tunnel from New York would be stopped and the daylights beaten out of them because they weren't from the area. That was that type of city. That's the city he ran. He ran it like a communist country. The people that live there wouldn't dare speak bad about him because they would have their brains beaten in. This was a ruthless man. Did he have that in him to do this, to ruin somebody's life like he did? I believe he did. I believe he did. He had a lot to lose if the politics didn't go the way he wanted it to at that time. He would have lost everything. Here's a man that grew up in a slum. He was white trash. He lived in an area they were poor as can be. In filth. They lived in filth. Okay? I'm not saying his family, was filthy, but in the area of the city that he was, it was the lowest part of the city, like the slums. That's where he grew up. Now, he's taken lavish vacations, first class on every ship that you check him, maybe the first one or two when he started to travel, maybe weren't for first class, but all of the others were. Okay, he used to go to the racetrack. Thousands of dollars in a roll held with a rubber band. This is the way he lived. He wasn't giving that up for anyone. Not for anyone. Now, there's also reports that he was involved with Abner Zillman. Abner Zillman was from New York, and he was a known mobster. He was also connected with an organization, a group, whatever you want to call it, known as Murder, Inc. Okay? They assassinated people. He was a bootlegger. He sold drugs. They did assassinations. And there was known ties between Hague and him. These are the people that he associated with. Usually associate with people that are like yourself. So it seems to me that Hague, and in writings it does show or talks about different situations where he had a violent tendency. He had no regard for anybody. His word was it, and that was it. And if anyone dared go against that, they faced trouble. There was trouble. I mean, there was one guy that they wrote about that the daylights were beaten out of him. And Hague was someone that took a nice crack at him himself. That guy wound up dying in the hospital. So that's basically murder. They beat him to death. He didn't die on the spot, but he did 2 weeks later. Now, did he die because of his injuries, or did somebody make a trip over to the hospital and do him in. Hague ran the hospital. He had that a hospital built with a crazy amount of funds from Roosevelt when he became president. It seemed like it was basically a thank you. Frank Hague turned out so many votes for him, and that's another thing, all along, right up to the very end, Hague was voting, backing the guy that was running against him. I guess when he realized that his guy had no chance of winning, he flip-flopped and kissed Roosevelt's ass and got him in, So he got what he wanted. Morrow and the Lindberghs were out of the picture. He backed the president at the last moment, got him in, and then it was smooth sailing from there. He was pretty set for quite a few years. Although a lot of people didn't like him, even higher ups, they dealt with him because of who he was and, what he had the power to do. So, it doesn't seem unlikely that he could do such a thing. Like I said, he would have lost everything, and I'm sure he wasn't about to do that. Now, I'm going to talk real briefly on this next subject. I know some people might, not like to hear this, but I'm going to go into the area of the baby. When they found that child, they found that baby in June, so it was only like 3 months after the kidnapping happened. And I'm sure by now most of you have seen pictures of the corpse that was found under the tree. What I want to say is that, back then, now this is March, April, May, June. They found the baby in June. The baby was kidnapped in March. So March, the weather is still a little chilly. And their weather was a lot different than ours is today. I mean, even when I was a kid in the early, 60s, winters were freezing. So I'm sure back in the 30s it was even colder. But to look at that baby, to me it's obvious that that child that was found was so decomposed. To me it didn't seem possible that just a little over 2.5 months, because it was just, that a body could decompose that quickly, especially in really cold climate. Now, they mentioned that some of the foot, that they could have identified the baby, first of all, because he had, the crooked toes. He was known to have rickets, which was not unusual back then, but his toes were crooked. And the foot the foot that was, I guess, more crooked than the other was missing. It was gone. They said that's, probably an animal chewed on it. Honestly, I don't believe that an animal would just chew his foot off. The whole leg wasn't missing. Now, I live in the country, and I know for a fact, and I've seen it many times, when an animal gets a hold of a body, now I'm not talking about a person, thank God I haven't seen a person out there, but I'm talking about other animals. First of all, they either, especially if they're small like that, will drag them away. They wouldn't leave, although the baby maybe was put in another place and an animal could have brought it to where it was. But they don't usually eat the bones before the flesh is gone. They want the flesh. They don't want to eat gnaw on the bones. So if you look at the picture, you could see that the skin and some of the hair is still, it looks like hair, is still on the skull. If there's flesh on the face, the animal is going to feed on the flesh before that would be my assumption, since I see it in my own yard. I mean, there's been dead animals in the yard where the vultures come down and you could actually watch them eat whatever. They clean it down to a clean skeleton. So my feeling is that that baby that was there was not that of the Lindbergh baby. I believe that that baby was placed there. I believe that baby was placed there. I think what happened here was that they didn't expect the ruckus that was caused by this incident. They didn't expect the people to react to that kidnapping like they did. I mean, the amount of the ransom notes, there was 12 of them. That's crazy. That's crazy, because that tells me, you know, I'm not an investigator, but I'm not stupid. If that baby was killed immediately coming down the ladder, like they say, like they, you know, suggest that that's what happened, and whoever took the baby then just dumped it in the area of where they found it. I don't think that they would stretch that out with 12 ransom notes knowing that they have a dead baby on their hands. That would have been the easiest way to get caught. Why in God's name would they do that? I could see 12 ransom notes to keep it going when you know the baby is well and alive, and they're not going to find it where it is. You could go on forever with the ransom notes, back and forth, back and forth. But I think it just got a little out of control. It didn't go the way that probably it was planned. And then to make it go away, you let them find the baby. I believe that that baby was planted there to make it go away, because it was lingering on for days and weeks and months. You know, I mean, I don't think they expected that to happen. Now, this is what I'm going to say that might make people a little. Now, I talked about how Hague ran his city. If he didn't want you in his city, you weren't going to his city. You would be kept out. And people were scared to death to go against what he orders. He was in full charge of everything. He ran everything within the city, within Jersey City, especially the medical center. If anybody could produce a body, it could be him. He was the one to build that. All right, the hospital itself, completion, was not done until well after the baby's kidnapping, but the hospital did exist back then. He had full control over that. In fact, when the hospital was completed, that's where his office was, inside the hospital. So if anybody had the ability to produce a dead child to be put in that area to shut people up, it could have been him.